Hello, I'm T.D. McKinnon. My book, Terra Nullius, is an historical novel based on historical facts relating to the genocide of the First Nation people of Tasmania, Australia, at the hands of the invading British colonials in the 19th century, and tells how that genocide was accomplished in less than 70 years. The term Terra Nullius is a Latin phrase meaning land of none, and when the British invaders arrived in what we now know as Tasmania, they proclaimed the land Terra Nullius, with no regard whatsoever to the standing residents, who'd been the caretakers of that land for some 40,000 years or more. A central character in my book, Terra Nullius, is Trucannini, who was the daughter of a clan chief named Mangana. Trucannini, born around 1812 and dying in 1876, is widely regarded as the last full-blood First Nation Tasmanian. Terra Nullius traces the history of that genocidal atrocity through the life of Trucannini and her futile attempts to negotiate a safe path for herself and her people. Originally from Scotland, it wasn't until I actually came to Tasmania that I became aware of the genocide. It wasn't in any history books that I ever read. But as it turns out, it's a little known fact in Australia, let alone Scotland and the rest of the world. Once I did learn the truth, then I came to know Trucannini, who, although small of stature, tiny in fact, was a brave and courageous individual. I felt compelled to write Terra Nullius and to tell her sad story and that of her people. Following is an extract from Terra Nullius, read for you by Zoë Lake. I hope you enjoy it. Oh, and you can read sample chapters of Terra Nullius on my website at tdmckinnon.com, where you'll also find sample chapters of my other books. All my books are available as ebooks, which you can purchase from all the usual ebook distributors, and, for your convenience, you'll find links to those on my website. This is T.D. McKinnon. Thank you for listening, and take care until next time.
Terra Nullius by T.D. McKinnon. Chapter 12, Mission's End. Read by Zoë Lake. The weather had broken down completely as they set sail and, as well as the growing storm, the coughing disease, rife among the crew, soon took hold of the susceptible caretakers. By the time they reached their destination, the island the aliens were calling Flinders, one of the caretakers had already departed for the land of dreams. Several others were near terminal, and Wiraddy had also started to come down with the dreaded disease. For so long she had swum against the current, desperately trying to ensure the survival of her people, looking now upon the sad, tired remnants of humanity that were assembled to meet them, suddenly acutely aware that in spite of all her best efforts, they represented the very last of the once proud caretakers. She cried aloud, "How has it come to this?" The friendly mission convicts were taken away by redcoats to be imprisoned once more, and, it was soon apparent, the island was nothing more than the final place of imprisonment for the remnants of an entire race.
"I will return soon to ensure the continuing survival of your people,"
George Robinson told Trucannini, and then immediately absconded. She didn't know if he would return, nor did she care. All around her was the evidence of the measure of his honesty. Not only were they prisoners on a semi-barren, sandy island that, unlike the abundance of the land, offered little in the way of natural food supplies. They were not permitted to hunt, wander, or gather what little there was to find on the island. Made to farm, plant seeds and tend crops, alien foodstuff, and eat salted meat, which was distasteful and made them thirsty on an island that had only bitter-tasting pond water, no sweet running fresh water to quench that thirst. "Why do you cover yourselves with the alien garb?" said Trucannini, looking at her friend with disgust. The rain had been unceasing and hardly leaving the draughty, damp hut since their arrival. She had lost count of the days as she tended to Wiraddy, while he steadily worsened. Paggerly had brought some of the alien crop, something called potato, to offer to her friends. "We have to cover ourselves to go to their church, and we have to go to their church if we want to be given their food." "But I don't understand. Why do they want us to go to their church?" "To learn to be good, God-fearing Christians, they tell us." "We have enough gods and devils of our own to fear," she said acidly. I know, but we have to pretend to accept their beliefs, or we get no food." "Bah!" Trucannini was exhausted and bone-weary after 6 cycles on the mission. The disappointment of the promised land and the knowledge that she was fighting a losing battle to save her husband's life. She was not in the mood for the Lutetetawindahumoi's self-righteous arrogance. However, she did accept her friend's offering. Uradi slipped away later that night as Trucannini slept. The following day she wanted to build a funeral pyre, but was told he would be buried according to the Lutetetawindahumoi custom, in the ground in the fenced-off area with the little mounds and wooden crosses. "I am told I am not allowed to assist my husband to reach his ancestors in the land of dreams," said Trucannini in such a perfect semblance of his language that he took a moment to respond. Recovering, Dr. Allen, the commander of the island, said, "We will give him a Christian burial. That is the least we can do." "You wish to imprison us in death, as you do in life?" For many years Dr. Allen had heard stories of Trucannini, but thought, like most stories, they were probably exaggerated. When she had arrived with her dying husband, he hadn't had the chance to make her acquaintance. Now, as she stood before him, naked, her diminutive, shiny brown form, although tiny, somehow appearing larger than life, her soul-deep, dark eyes flashing angrily and speaking his language with perfection, any doubts were dispelled, and her raw sensuality disturbed him in a way he would never admit. "I am sorry you feel you are a prisoner, Trucannini. I can assure you that my only desire is to set your husband's spirit free. That is why he must have a Christian burial." Silently, she continued to look deep into his eyes until, uncomfortable under her scrutiny, he said, I understand your pain. Truly I do. I lost my wife to sickness some years ago, and I still miss her terribly." "How would you have felt if you had not been allowed to bury her? How would you have felt if you had been told to burn your wife and scatter her ashes?" she said without expression. He was suddenly very angry. He had reached out to this unfortunate native woman, offering some measure of solace, and she had thrown it in his face. "I think you should leave now, and prepare your husband for burial," he said curtly, indicating her dismissal. Picking up his quill, he deliberately looked down at a document he had previously been penning. He forced himself to ignore her presence until at last she turned and walked away. As she reached the door, he looked up and, still angry, said, "Trucannini, pick up some clothes from the store. I will not have a naked heathen at a Christian burial." Angrier than she had been for a long time, she forced herself to walk away. She knew that anything she said or did, rather than change his mind, would be likely to bring down the wrath of this arrogant alien. The punishment would come soon enough. Firstly, she must do something that would truly warrant it. The wailing penetrated Dr. Allen's sleep, waking him with a start. Fumbling with the lamp at his bedside, it seemed to take an eternity as the wailing continued to build into a crescendo. Eventually, the lamp flickered into life. Pulling on a robe, he stumbled through his dwelling and out into the night. The wailing now more like an eerie, keening howl, emanated from the main redcoat shelter, 50 paces away, ablaze with lamplight. Gathering in front of the shelter was a rapidly growing crowd of caretakers, their angry voices gaining volume. As he hurried towards the hut, the wailing stopped abruptly, but then immediately began again. Forcing his way through the crowd of natives, he banged on the door. "What the devil is going on, Sergeant White?" "Sorry, sir," said the redcoat commander, opening the door. "We was hoping to quiet her down before she woke you." "What in God's name is going on here?" 3 redcoats were attempting to subdue Trucannini while, tiny as she was doing a good job of keeping clear enough that she might continue to wail. "Stop this at once," he ordered. "Unhand her this minute." Trucannini, silent now, stood eyeing him defiantly, blood trickling from her mouth and nose. Glad of the opportunity to avoid her accusing look, Dr. Allen turned a questioning eye on Sergeant White. "Well?" "Sir, we was alerted to what we thought was a corrobboree in progress, only to find this'n in the process of burning her husband." "What?" spluttered Dr. Allen. "Were you in time to stop the heinous heathen act?" "No, sir. 'Fraid not. They built up a pretty big bonfire and perched him atop like a bleeding guy fox. There was no way to put it out without risking life and limb, sir." Angry now, glancing in Trucannini's direction as she touched her bruised and broken lips, he said, "Who struck her?" One of the redcoats, shifting uncomfortably and looking at Trucannini, said, "She grabbed me private, sir. It were a reflex action." Dr. Allen saw the ghost of a smile behind her stoic defiance. "You deliberately defied my orders," he accused, getting angrier by the moment. "No," she said simply. "What? But explain yourself." "I deliberately obeyed the laws of my people," she said, carefully measuring her answer. "I inadvertently defied your orders," she finished, demonstrating a far greater understanding of his language than anyone in the room, except perhaps himself. Seething in silence for a moment, feeling the blood pulse at his temples, he thought, "All the stories I've heard about this native woman are true." Taking a slow, deep breath, he said, "You do know I must make an example of you, don't you?" She nodded, and there was that ghost of a smile again, before the stoic, arrogant defiance returned. Sitting on the sun-warmed rock, Trucannini watched the little boat moving steadily away, across the open water towards Flinders. After being sentenced to 5 days and nights of solitary confinement, she had been ferried out to Seal Island and dropped off with bread and water rations. From her vantage point atop the rocks, looking over the heads of the boat crew, she could barely make out the little jetty where earlier the sad-faced crowd had gathered to see her off, where, for an instant, she had spotted a face she hadn't seen for a long, long time, but she was sure it was him. Much older, harder, and, even from that one glimpse, he appeared to be very ill. But it was him, she was sure. Trucannini watched the little boat all the way back to Flinders Island, and then, standing up, she stretched, enjoying the warmth of the sun, before opening and looking through the little sack of bread. "This is disgusting," she said aloud. Every scrap of it was infested with weevils, and she scattered the bread for the waiting, scavenging seagulls. Then, taking a drink from the clay pot that had been left, she screwed up her face. "Pond water!" before pouring it onto the rocks. "All right," she said. "That's your rations gone. Only one thing left to do now." Wading into the water, she turned the clay pot upside down, carefully trapping the air. Holding it steady, she pushed off, kicking strongly in a relaxed, rhythmic fashion, in the direction of Flinders Island. She was a strong swimmer and could probably make it back to the island comfortably, she thought. But she didn't know these waters. There might be strong adverse currents, and utilizing the clay pot as a flotation device would keep some of her strength in reserve, just in case. Besides, once back on the island, she could put the pot to good use. It was a calm day. She was lucky. The ocean was reasonably flat, and she encountered no unexpected rips, currents, or undertows. In fact, not only was it a clear day, shortly after setting off, the smoke of a beach fire in the vicinity of the little jetty helped her keep direction. And, as the last rays of sunlight were almost gone, the steady flicker of the fire was visible, keeping her on course until she had reached the little jetty. "You are a good swimmer," a voice said as Trucannini emerged, dripping from the ocean. Not surprised to see him, she flashed him a radiant smile, a rare occurrence these days, prompting an immediate surprised response. "The years have not dulled your beauty," he said. She was older and had suffered much, mentally and physically, since last he had seen her. Her beautiful, intelligent eyes were not quite so bright as they once were, but her petite figure was still that of a girl, and her smile, although rarely in evidence these days, still lit up her lovely face. "You have learnt charm since last we met, Weimerick," she said, stepping forward and greeting him with a warm embrace. He reminded her so much of his brother that she permitted herself the indulgence, for a moment, of dallying in that embrace. However, the odour of the ghost-skin sickness was still upon him, and, stepping back to look at him carefully, she said, "How long have you had the sickness?" "Almost a moon," he said, and then pointing in the direction of Seal Island, "since before they sent us out there." "Then you have passed the worst of it," she said, relieved, embracing him again, and then realizing what he had said, "But why did they put you on the rock?" As he led her to the warmth of his fire, he told her of the ordeal of the 12, of which there were now only 7. And as he finished his account, attempting to make his story of misery less burdensome, he said light-heartedly, "And if I had tried that swim, even at the peak of fitness, I would now be swimming in the land of dreams." "My people are of the sea," she said modestly. "You are of the mountain forests. The ocean is not your natural element." Huddled together by the fire, eating what little fare Weimerick had managed to scrounge, they brought each other up to date with the intervening years since their last meeting, crying together over their losses and the sad fate of the caretakers. As they comforted each other, the chemistry between them was unmistakable. He did remind her of Parawina, but her attraction to Weimerick was far more than that. However, fatigued to the point of exhaustion as they were, he by his illness and she by her epic swim, they soon fell asleep in each other's arms, happy for the first time in years.